So it's been a while. How about I do an updated shop tour? Now, I don't think I'm going to talk that many specifics about individual tools for two reasons. So first, and maybe the graying hair is enough of a hint, but I've been woodworking for like 30 years, and so I've owned a number of the tools in my shop for a long time, and they're just not comparable to the current models out there. And the second thing is that I live in Canada, but YouTube tells me that only about 10% of my viewers are from Canada. But a lot of the tools that I own are tool brands that are only available in Canada. My drill press, for instance, is a Mastercraft, which is a house name for the Canadian Tire store chain here in Canada. Now, it's very similar to a lot of other import drill presses out there, but the fact remains is there's no Mastercrafts anywhere outside of Canada. And in fact, this one is over 25 years old, and Canadian Tire doesn't even sell floor standing drill presses anymore. And so while of course I'm going to talk about different tools, I'm thinking that I'll focus more on the quirks and features of my shop, which I hope will make this video interesting. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's back things up a bit. I've been in this shop for over 25 years, so I'm certainly used to the way things are. In fact, I might be blind a bit to, say, better layouts. So as I'm going through this tour, if you've got suggestions that could improve things, by all means, please drop them in the comments section down below. I'd love to see them. In case you haven't figured it out, I'm in a basement shop. That's my only window. There's the ground level. The shop is just 1 inch less than 24 feet long. So it's got a good length, but it's only 10 foot 8 inches wide. So it's kind of narrow, which constrains my layout quite a bit. So what's great about a basement shop? It's heated, it's insulated, it's air conditioned, and it only takes me a few steps to get into the shop and get to work. And we get to park in the garage. What's not so great about a basement shop is low ceilings. These are only 7'7". It's real easy to bump things into them, and of course the lights are always in my shots. And I'm surrounded on 3 sides by concrete. That's a concrete wall. That's a concrete wall. And that's a concrete wall, so there's not really many options for expansion. And everything has to be carried through the house and down the stairs to bring it into the shop. Tools, supplies, 10-foot long boards. So just a little technical digression, I'm trying to fit a lot of stuff into the camera, so I've got a really wide angle 10 to 18 millimeter lens on it to try to make things fit, so things might actually look a bit bigger than they are in reality. So let me do a quick overview on the layout, and then we'll get into some more details. This is the east wall, the door into the shop, fire extinguisher first thing, hearing protection, got my joiner, wall hung tool cabinet, and a workbench, and you know, some power tools on the wall. Here on the north wall, I got a wall of cabinets with a lot of storage, hardware, some other tools, and I got a wall of sanders and a rarely used little old CNC machine in the corner. Continuing my pivot to the west, this is the wall with all the big machinery. I've got the drill press, table saw, got sort of an assembly area, workbench, 17-inch bandsaw, 14-inch bandsaw, and dust collector. And continuing onto the south wall, I've got a scroll saw that I almost never use. I got some lumber storage. There was also some up there and some more up there. And swinging back around to the east, I've got my planer, and now we're back at the door. So what's missing? I can already hear some of you yelling at your screen, where's your miter saw? You gotta have a miter saw. I do have a miter saw, and it's down here. This is a flip-top tool stand. I built this a long time ago because of the need to save storage space, and I've got the planer on top, pardon me, and I've got the miter saw down below. So when I need a miter saw, there it is. This is your basic DeWalt miter saw. It's not a slider or anything fancy, but when I need it, I've got it. I have a more detailed video about this flip-top stand along with some plans, which I'll link to down below the video. So let me just jump in for a minute and say I'm probably going to do that sort of thing a lot. I've been on YouTube for nearly 10 years, and so a lot of the things that I'm going to show you, I probably have a more detailed video about, so I'm going to have a long list of videos down below that I'm going to refer you to at different times in the video. And I also have a website where I've got dozens of projects and project plans available. So a flip-top stand is great for making use of valuable space in a small shop, but the act of flipping does take an effort, and that means that I'm not going to flip this thing over just to make 1 or 2 cuts on the miter saw. I will usually do a lot of my cross cuts on the table saw using a crosscut sled, or if it's just rough cuts, I'll just use my circular saw. And now that I flipped it, you can see that I own the DeWalt DW735 planer. I literally just put out a video where I tore this down and replaced the cutter head with a helical cutter head. It's way too soon to give a review, but if you want to know more details about that, video down below. This is just a parking spot, by the way. When I want to use the planer, I have to pull it out and wheel it over into the center of the shop so I can hook it up to dust collection and have room for actually using it. Believe me, I've tried to think up a layout that lets me have the planer out and accessible 100% of the time, but I run into that issue of limited width and the need for infeed and outfeed space. The joiner, the planer, the table saw, they all have pretty big requirements for infeed and outfeed. The table saw, because of the narrow width of my shop, basically it only makes sense to have it next to the wall. I've thought about putting it on that wall, but that basically involves tearing everything apart because this is the wall where I have the majority of the dust collection. So maybe pause for a second and rewind the video to where I put in the screenshot from my sketch of the whole shop layout. And if you can come up with a better layout, again, put it down below. Getting back to the what maybe is missing, I bet a lot of you have wondered, where's my router table? I actually do have one, but I don't have a, permanently installed one. My router table is portable and it's parked down here underneath my assembly table. I built this years ago, mostly out of scrap plywood. It was sort of meant to be a temporary figure out what I want in a router table project. The top was, I bought a piece of 2 foot by 4 foot MDF from the big box store, 1/2 inch thick, and I built a torsion box top. The rest of it is just scrap plywood. And I've got a Porter cable router, and I have the base just permanently mounted to the underside of the top. And to change the router bit, I just take the motor out, and when I'm ready, I can just screw it back in and clamp it into place. I also have wired in a power switch here to make it easy to turn off and on. So the overall top is 24 inches long by 18 inches deep. The fence is a simple homemade wooden fence that I clamp into place when I want to use it. And for the most part, it's worked just fine. Now, would a bigger, fancier one with more features be better? I mean, maybe, but again, I have a small shop and I have to work within those constraints. It's worked pretty good. Okay, why do I have 2 bandsaws? I've just been harping on the fact that I got a small shop. So here's the story. I bought this no-name 14-inch bandsaw somewhere around 2000, I think, something like that. I was starting out, that's what I could afford. I had it for a number of years, and then somewhere about 10 years later, this one popped up for sale. This is an actual Grizzly, by the way. It's one that you can find online for my American friends. And by then, I'd wanted a bigger bandsaw and more cut capacity, and I fully intended to get rid of this one. But a wise older woodworker told me, he's like, if you can, hang on to that one. And so I kept it just for a little while. I mean, after all, I'd already bought it, the money was spent. And it's really nice having 2 bandsaws, and all the experienced people know exactly why. Because I keep a big blade on this one and I use it for straight cuts and resawing. And I keep a small blade on this one and I use it for smaller projects and for curves. And yeah, it takes up a bit of space, but I've got this one on wheels, and so I have it shoved back into an awkward corner. And when I want to use it, if it's a small piece, I can just use it right there, or I can easily pull it out. And also, I have a detailed video about making this mobile base for this bandsaw. Links down below. I want to take another digression and talk about casters for a moment. I'd like you to notice for a minute that I got 4 wheels under this bandsaw stand, and all 4 of them pivot, so I can spin this thing right within its own footprint. In a small shop where you don't have a lot of space, you absolutely must have 4 pivoting wheels on your tools or work stands. I've got that on the planer, I've got that on the bandsaw, on the joiner, and even on my table saw stand. In a small shop, you need to be able to spin on a dime. In a larger shop, you'll want tool stands where there's 2 fixed wheels and 2 pivoting wheels, like a grocery cart. That will track well over distance, but that's meaningless in a small shop. You don't have any large distance to go. It's more important that you can just spin your tool right where it stands. Moving on, we've got my 6-inch jointer. This is the Delta X5 model. Jointers have the deep fence often, and on mine, I have it actually tucked right into the stud wall here to try to keep it out of the way. When I need to do some jointing of something extra long, and I can just pull it out because of course it's mounted on a mobile base like pretty much everything. If I had the space, I would love an 8-inch joiner, but I don't. Last year I put out a video, link below, where I tore this apart and installed a helical head, which I love. Got nothing bad to say about it, highly recommended. Moving on, let's talk about sanders. Down here at the end of my shop is where I have my stationary sanders. In fact, you can't even see all of them because I have a fourth one that I keep tucked away down here because I haven't really figured out a permanent place for it yet, but it's so small and light, it's easy to pick up. Yeah, do I need all of them? Well, kind of. I find I use all of them in different ways, and it's not like I haven't really spent a lot of money because I built that one, this one was secondhand, this one was secondhand, and this one was like, you know, $40, $50, super cheap. As I said, I built this one myself. It's a 12-inch disc sander, and I built it with a surplus furnace motor. I do have a detailed build video, but I'll warn you, it's one of the very first videos I ever made, so it's probably a little rough around the edges. But between the surplus motor and just wood from around the shop, this thing cost like $5 to build. Not that long ago, I added this 2-inch hard piping to the back so that all of these sanders are actually piped into a system which then goes to a shop vac. It's actually working really well for containing the dust at the source. My main dust collector is down at the other end of the shop, and I used to have a 4-inch pipe that came all the way down here, and I would hook up one of the sanders to it one at a time, but I didn't find it was that great, and instead I've switched to using a shop vac. I've heard from a few people that the high velocity air from a shop vac tends to work better for sanders, and it certainly seems a lot convenient. I mean, maybe part of that is that my dust collector is all the way at the other end of the shop and that I only had a 4-inch pipe. And this ugly monstrosity underneath my drill press is a shop vac that I picked up on trash day, and I've hooked it up to a couple of buckets which are what's called a theme baffle type cyclone. Made this ages ago, video down below. It's a weird looking thing, but I can't believe how well it works. Basically all the dust ends up in this bucket, virtually nothing gets through to the shop vac. I mentioned this drill press way back at the beginning of the video. I've got it tucked into a corner. A corner is a good location for a drill press because most of the time you're drilling something small, so you can just work with it, and I can always just walk the thing out into the shop when I need to drill something bigger that needs more space. This is my mobile table saw stand, and I'm really proud of it. I mean, in a small shop, everything needs to be mobile. And there have been times when I've needed to spin it for doing a cut in this direction. Your average table saw's got a whole ton of empty space here, and it even has empty space there. I've seen lots of people building cabinets to fit under the wing on the one side, but I haven't seen too many cabinets that also go on the left side. So I needed something mobile, but when I moved the table saw, what happens to the cabinets? So I'm like, well, the cabinets got to come with it. And it's all modular. 1, 2, 3 sections. That's all built separately, and they can come off. I have taken it apart once because this front leg used to be a 2x4 and it started to flex. And I had to take this apart and replace it with a piece of hardwood, and added some supports at the same time. Again, there is a detailed video available about this and also a set of plans if anybody's interested. And oh yeah, the table saw itself, it was a General International, which was the import side of the General brand. But even though the table saw itself was an import, the fence was a made in Canada General fence. So I mean, the same fence on the super expensive General table saws was on my more inexpensive contractor saw. But regardless, the company's defunct, so you can't buy them anymore. And being a 20-plus-year-old saw, there's no riving knife, just a splitter, and of course, nothing like the saw stop technology. And this quirky thing is simply how I turn off the table saw. You see, years ago when I set up the shop, I ran a circuit here for the table saw. So this is a dedicated outlet for the table saw. And I made it a switched outlet because we had younger kids then. So I made it a practice to always turn off the power to the table saw when I left the shop. And this is just a little neon bulb there so that when I turn off the lights to the shop, I can see that glowing or not glowing if the power is on or off. But as the years go by, I got more tools into the shop, and I ended up pushing the table saw farther to this end of the shop. And so now I'm normally standing on this side of the table saw, and the switch is way over there. And I really like having a switched outlet because that means I don't fuss with unplugging it when I'm working on the blades. I just make sure the power's off. So I made this long stick, which is basically a stick with a hole in it, which is now a switch extension. So from back here, I'm standing behind the table saw and I can just reach over and click the switch to kill power to the table saw. That's what this weird thing is. Lazy people like to invent ways to save a few steps. The lazy comment made me think about something else about my table saw. If you'll see the dust hook up here for the table saw, you'll notice there's no blast gate. The lighting is terrible, but if I take you under the table saw, you can see the blast gate is underneath it and it's hooked up to this cable, which goes up there. And then up here, I have this little lever that I've wired together. And what that means is that I can be standing here behind the table saw, right beside the power switch, and I can just reach under here, and now I've opened the blast gate to the table saw, and of course, you know, my dust collector switch is right above my head. And yes, of course, I have a video about this project also. I got your basic 2 horsepower dust collector tucked out of the way into the corner. A Cyclone would probably be better, but I don't have the ceiling height for most of them. The one thing I did do is I changed the top to a pleated cartridge filter, which is way better than the, you know, the felted fabric that it normally would come with. I think probably the coolest thing about my dust collector situation is the remote control unit that I have it plugged into. A lot of people have wireless remote controls on their dust collector, but this one is a wired remote. So I just have a switch that is centrally mounted in the shop ceiling and another one over here. It's very easy to reach. That's one of the nice things about a smaller shop. And you know, no batteries, no losing a remote control. Again, this remote control setup is detailed more in a video down below. And on the topic of dust, another somewhat recent purchase is this Fein Turbo 1 shop vac, which I've pretty much dedicated to sanding with my random orbit sander. It was not super cheap, but it was a lot cheaper than a Festool vac, and I really wish I got one years ago because it's basically turned sanding into a virtually dust-free operation. It has made a bit of a mess of this area of the shop because I used to be able to take my workbench and I could move it behind the table saw when I want to use it for outfeed or if I want to do something there, and this is just in the way. So that is something that's up in the air, and I've thought about moving it over under the tool bench there or somewhere else. It's in a state of flux, but that's the way it is right now. Over on Instagram, I had somebody ask me about wood storage because years ago in a video I made a comment about how I like to store my wood at the store. And he said, do you still do that? And it's like, well, kind of. This is sort of what I have for sheet goods storage. And as you can see, I don't have a single full sheet of plywood because I just don't have the room for that. Whenever I'm building something with plywood, I will take my plans and I'll go to the store and I'll buy the plywood I need, and I will usually have the store make the first cut so that ideally I'm not carrying anything bigger than a 4x4 piece down here to the shop. And yeah, I just don't have room to store plywood. Hardwood is a different matter because I do happen to have a hardwood dealer only about a mile or so away, but they're in town, which means they're charging town prices. The best way to get hardwood is to get out of town. Go find a lumber mill out in the woods, out in the sticks somewhere. And I've found a couple over the years. Right now, I drive almost an hour out of town whenever I want to buy hardwood lumber. I have to call the guy, make sure he's going to actually be there because it's a small operation. And usually about once or twice a year, I'll make a run down to the lumber yard and I'll pick up, you know, some maple, cherry, walnut, domestics. I mean, it's a local lumber yard, so it's only got domestics. So if I want anything exotic, yeah, then I got to go to somebody who's going to import it. So yeah, you will see some wood behind me in the shop. I also have racks up in the garage where I store more because I go and buy a couple hundred board feet at a time. And yeah, I mean, I'm like many people, I keep way too much stuff, so I have lots of thin stuff in this cabinet that is right above my head when I walk in the door. And I've got the rack on the end wall, and I even have some pieces up here, some Osage orange and some bloodwood and some yellow heart. I like to keep just a few boards of exotics around in case I'm doing cutting boards, because then I like to slip in different colors. Every now and then I just need to discipline myself to go through the shop and just throw out all the small stuff. Otherwise I'll be drowning in it. So because I shoot YouTube videos, lighting is an important part of my shop. And I've tried a lot of things over the years. You know, I used to just have some fluorescent tubes in the ceiling. And then a number of years ago, I started experimenting with homemade LED lights, and I still have a few remnants of this down at this end. I tried, I'm not even sure this is showing up on screen. I tried just making my own fixtures with strips, some of them bare. I tried buying a diffuser to make some. They're okay, but eventually the market moved on enough. And now I just have, in the main part of the shop, I have tons of these LED strips. And of course, I grabbed one here from another part of the basement so you can look at it where it's not turned on. They're made to look kind of like a fluorescent tube, but they are basically just a couple of strips of LED lights with a little diffuser on top, and they have a little plug at either end. And I buy them by like the pack of 8 or 6 from Amazon, and I'll put links to that down below. Baria is the name. And I was going to tell you how good they were, but as I was setting up for this shop, I noticed that I happen to have a dead one down here. And I don't think it's a loose connection. I think it's just actually dead. So it's about 3 years old, 4 years old. I'm not actually sure when I bought it. I'll put it on the screen if I can find when I bought it. But otherwise, I've been really happy. I'm kind of surprised that one of them died. But again, lighting is really important, so I have a ridiculous amount of lights in here because I need to have it bright. I need to have a minimum amount of shadows. And the whole low ceiling thing is a problem for me. I've tried spotlights in various areas, but that just makes hawk zones, and so I just need to have something simple and diffuse over the whole ceiling. And now in the background, you might have noticed this air hose, but you haven't seen a compressor. I actually do have a compressor, but that's another one of my projects from about a year ago. I've been trying to make my shop more useful and by moving stuff out of the shop. So I actually took the compressor and I moved it into the garage, drilled a hole, and I just run the hose in here. And then I have a remote control here that'll turn on the air compressor so I can have air when I need it. And there's a splitter in there so that I can also take air and use it in the garage. So we've come to the end of everything that I had written down to be talked about. I think I've covered all the interesting parts. If I missed something, if there's something you want to know about, please drop a comment down below and I'll see what I can do. As always, thanks for stopping by. I hope you got some ideas that you can use in your own shop, and we'll see you on the next one.